You know, we all talk about the cloud, but have you ever stopped to think about where it actually is? Well, it's not up in the sky. It's in these giant power-guzzling buildings we call data centers. But what if we took them and moved them to the bottom of the ocean? It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but believe me, this idea is making some serious waves. Okay, let's just address the giant squid in the room. Why on earth would you do this? It sounds completely bonkers, right? But with the explosion of AI and all the computing power that demands, our data centers on dry land are starting to face some really big problems. And the solution, believe it or not, might just be underwater. See, data centers on land are absolute beasts. They consume an unbelievable amount of electricity. They use billions of gallons of fresh water just to keep from overheating. They take up huge amounts of expensive land, often near big cities. And let's be honest, nobody wants a giant, hot, noisy building popping up in their neighborhood. It's a real problem, and it's what forced engineers to think way outside the box. So what's the big idea? Well, when you boil it down, it's actually kind of simple. You take a whole bunch of computer servers, stick them in a waterproof submarine-like tube, sink it to the bottom of the ocean, and then just run some cables back to shore for power and data. It's a wild concept for sure, and one tech giant decided to see if it could actually be done. Yep, this wasn't just some idea on a whiteboard. It became a very real experiment. Back in 2015, Microsoft kicked off something called Project Natick. They wanted to find out, once and for all, if this crazy idea wasn't just possible, but if it was actually practical. And they were serious about this. This wasn't a weekend project. After a short test proved the basic idea worked, they went all in. They built a full-on data center about the size of a shipping container and dropped it 117 feet into the chilly waters off the coast of Scotland and just left it there for 2 whole years. And here it is. Look at this thing. This is the Northern Isles data center before it took the plunge. It's all gleaming white. Honestly, it looks more like a piece of a space station than a submarine. It was packed with 864 servers, all ready to run on their own with nobody around to check on them. Now, fast forward 2 years. When they pulled it back up, it looked like this, totally covered in barnacles, algae, you name it. It had literally become an artificial reef, a part of the local ecosystem. But the real surprise, the absolute shocker, was what they discovered when they opened it up. It all came down to this one number: 8 times. What in the world could possibly be 8 times better just by sitting at the bottom of the ocean for 2 years? The servers. The servers inside were 8 times more reliable. Let that sink in for a second. Their failure rate was just 1/8 of an identical batch of servers running in a normal data center on land. This wasn't just a tiny improvement. This was a massive, potentially world-changing result. So you're probably asking, how? How is that even possible? Well, it turns out they had created the perfect little spa getaway for computers. The inside was filled with pure nitrogen, not corrosive oxygen. The cold seawater kept the temperature perfectly stable. And maybe most importantly, there were no humans around to accidentally bump things, spill coffee, or just mess things up. It was a server paradise. With results like that, you'd think we'd be seeing these things popping up off the coast of every major city by now, right? It seemed like a total home run, an absolute success. But well, this is where the story takes a pretty big twist. This is the question, isn't it? We have a technology that's more reliable, way more energy efficient, uses zero fresh water, so when does it take over the world? Well, the answer, weirdly enough, was it didn't. Yep. Even though the technology worked beautifully, Microsoft quietly put the entire project on a shelf. And according to reports, it all came down to the simple stuff: money and customers. The economics just didn't make sense. So how expensive are we talking? Well, this number gives you a pretty good idea. It comes from a recent study looking at building a commercial one in Estonia. Over $4.6 million, and that's the estimated price tag for just one pretty small underwater data center. Now try to imagine what it would cost to deploy thousands of these to run the entire global cloud. The numbers just get astronomical really fast. So the business plan just kind of fell apart. The cost to build these things, tow them out to sea, and eventually pull them back up was just huge. And here's the real kicker. That locked-for-life design, the very thing that made the servers so reliable, it turned out to be a huge weakness. In the world of AI, technology changes every single year. You can't afford to be locked into 5-year-old hardware you can't upgrade. But wait, the story isn't over. The idea was just too good to disappear completely. And now it's being reborn. Not as a replacement for every data center out there, but as something else entirely, a strategic tool. This really captures the change in thinking. Project Natick was this huge, let's change the world research project by a tech giant. But this new wave, it's much more focused. It's being looked at by entire countries and companies as a very specific tool to solve very specific problems. The reasons for doing this have totally changed. It's not just about efficiency anymore. Now it's about big ideas like digital sovereignty, nations wanting physical control over their own data in their own waters, or, get this, pairing them with offshore wind farms to create their own power grid. It's also about making critical infrastructure safer by moving it away from populated areas. So the idea is very much alive and well, just in different circles. This is the cover of that same 2024 Estonian study we mentioned. The conversation is no longer just, is this cool tech? It's, does this make strategic and commercial sense for us? So in the end, it's this incredibly complex balancing act. On the one hand, the pros are amazing. They're super efficient, they're super reliable, and they save tons of land and fresh water. But on the other hand, you have that massive price tag, the difficulty of repairs, and a whole host of new questions about environmental impact and the security of our underwater infrastructure. Which brings us right back to the beginning. So, is this a failed dream? Or is it an idea that's finally finding its true purpose as a specialized tool for a very different world? The grand vision of putting all our data centers under the sea, that might be over. But what started as a corporate science experiment has now evolved into a serious strategic option for entire nations. The next chapter of the internet's future is still being written, right there on the ocean floor.